drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
Texas law SB 4 to allow state and local authorities to make arrests for illegal entry isn't going into play right now, and then it's still in legal limbo. They know these things. The cartels are very smart.
New York City is a self-declared sanctuary city.
Republicans are playing politics with human beings, using them as props.
And we're back. A couple familiar faces with me today. Jeff Emde, our in-house 007 former CIA operative. Mike Sterling, our in-house mad bomber. And a special guest, the Attorney General from the state of Missouri, Andrew Bailey. Thanks for joining us, Andrew. I know you're a busy man.
Hey, thanks for having me on, guys. Really appreciate the opportunity.
So, as I mentioned before we hit record, we ask a question from the conflicted game at the beginning of each episode, and then we all circle back on it at the end to answer it. So I'm going to give the audience the question right now, and when you all hear it, you can leave your answers down below in the comment section. And pardon me, but the writing is so small on these cards, I can't read it without a flashlight. I guess that makes me old or something, but here we go. The government say again?
You're so old.
Yeah, I feel it sometimes. High mileage. The government collapsed and everyone has been on their own for months. Out of nowhere, 6 men wearing UN uniforms appear at your door saying that they are with the government and they need your ammo and supplies along with everyone else's in order to help reestablish order. You and your family must comply or be counted as anti-government radicals. Would you enlist and donate all you have to the new government and be counted as a patriot? Or would you be labeled as a terrorist and fight them off if you could? That's a good question.
Yeah, somebody from the UN comes to my house for my guns and ammunition. They're getting the lead first. We're fighting.
So we don't have to ask Andrew for his answer at the end. He's giving it to us right up front.
Easy one for me.
So, Andrew, give us your background. I know you served in the Army. You're obviously an attorney. Now you're an attorney general, but in your own words.
Yeah. Look, I grew up in Missouri, went to the University of Missouri on an Army ROTC scholarship in 1999, planned on going to law school. 9/11 happened. Plans changed. Volunteered for Armor Branch. I was trained on tanks at Fort Knox, Kentucky, assigned to the last heavy armored cavalry regiment in the Army, the 3rd ACR, instantly deployed to Iraq as an armored cavalry scout platoon leader. We were stationed in Nineveh province in 2005, 2006. I had the privilege of leading soldiers in combat there in Iraq and some of the heaviest fighting in Lawfare, Iraq in 2006. Came home to the United States. They moved my unit to Fort Hood, Texas. We drew all new equipment, stood the unit up, all new soldiers, trained for a year, and then went right back to Iraq as part of the surge. Second deployment, we were at Key West, just south of Mosul, on the Tigris River, and then we were there for 15 months, so 455 days, 2 Thanksgivings, 2 Christmases. I was an executive officer and then a troop commander, 13 platoons, 300 soldiers, about $100 million worth of equipment. Came home from that deployment and I was ready to go to law school. I moved to the city of St. Louis and I worked as an armed guard at a courthouse in inner city St. Louis for about a year. And then I went back to University of Missouri Law School on the post 9/11 GI Bill. And all I ever wanted to do was be a prosecuting attorney. My grandpa had worked in law enforcement and used to take me to court with him to watch him testify. So I grew up, thinking that working with police to lock bad guys up and find justice for victims is a cool job. And that's what I wanted to do. My wife that I met down in Texas when I was stationed there and we got married after law school, we ended up in Warren County, Missouri, a 3rd-class county kind of in east central Missouri. And I was an assistant prosecuting attorney. Would have done that job the rest of my life, but my wife and I became foster parents. We adopted kiddos and I started looking at my bills and all of a sudden couldn't afford to be an assistant prosecutor. So went to work for the Missouri Department of Corrections the same day Governor Parson, the current governor of the state of Missouri, took office. And the way he came into office under a turmoil, he was a lieutenant governor, so he didn't have a staff. And so he had to build a staff while determining, whether to sign or veto bills and going line item vetoing a budget and doing appointments and all the other things a governor does to run a state. He saw me working at DOC and pulled me up to be on his staff. I was just in the right place at the right time when my predecessor, Eric Schmidt, was elected to the United States Senate. And we've been hard at it for the last 18 months, fighting and winning for Missourians as Missouri's 44th Attorney General. It's a humbling privilege to get to serve in this capacity.
And that's awesome. we appreciate your service, both to the Army as well as the state of Missouri. And I say that because, as I mentioned previously, Todd Callender is a personal friend of mine, and you were recently on his show, Truth Be Told, and he's very impressed with the initiatives that you've undertaken. So let's start with that. The most recent one that I'm aware of is you suing New York State essentially for election interference. Explain the logic behind that, Andrew.
Yeah, well, you said it best. Look, this lawfare from blue states is poisonous to our democratic process. We can't let a rogue prosecutor and a collusive judiciary in the state of New York upend and undermine Missourians and every other state's sovereign interest in participating in a national presidential election. What they did was an illicit witch hunt prosecution of President Donald Trump, a political candidate, to take him off the campaign trail and silence him. And they were effective at that. We can't let that go on, or Missourians and all Americans will lose the right and the ability not only to have access to a presidential candidate, but to hear from a presidential candidate in the heat of a campaign in the most consequential election in this nation's history. I am using the tool that the founders contemplated in Article 3, Section 2 of the United States Constitution to assert Missouri's sovereign interest in participating in this election, hearing from and having access to a presidential candidate. And so we filed suit against the state of New York, and I'm excited to be litigating this matter in the highest court in this nation.
Yeah, that's absolutely amazing.
Fantastic.
Nice. Yeah, it is. So, Jeff, I'll go to you first. What are your thoughts on this? Because it seems to me like Andrew has a pretty strong case to argue that citizens of Missouri are being denied their constitutional right to hear from the top contender.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And this isn't a murder trial where they have Trump on video killing somebody. This is some bookkeeping error from 10 years ago that got converted from a misdemeanor to a felony just so they could, go after him. And, statutes, limitations had run everything. It was clearly 100% cooked up. And that goes against everything this country stands for. The guilty are punished, but they're entitled to fair trial and everything else. But you can't make up laws or interpretations of laws to go after your political opponents. And that is exactly what they did. So they need to be held accountable for this because, I'm in Arizona. I'm not in New York. I want to hear what Trump has to say. And if what he's saying is this case against me is trumped up nonsense, he has a right to say that because, well, he's actually 100% correct. But I want to hear him say it. And, it shouldn't be some idiot judge in New York says, no, sorry, I know you're halfway across the country, but I get to decide what you hear. And that's BS.
Land of Land, your trusted source for extraordinary vacant land across America that expresses your unique, special passions while diversifying your investment portfolio and hedging against runaway inflation. Imagine the thrill and prestige of land ownership, owning a piece of America, making the best investment on earth as simple as an online purchase. Off-the-grid serenity. Pricing from $1,000 payable by credit card. Visit us today at landofland.com, America's premier land wholesaler for over a decade.
Well, Andrew, that begs the question, what are the chances of this decision on Merchan's part that it's actually going to stand? Because again, I'm not an attorney, but his instructions to the jury, as far as I know, were, hey, if 4 of you think he's guilty on one count and 4 on another count and 4 on another count, I'll count that as a unanimous decision and therefore we'll convict on that. How could that stand on appeal?
It can't. Guys, look, the illicit nature of this witch hunt prosecution is evident because of the legal error, not only constitutional, but moral and ethical, that's been injected into this case, not only by the prosecutor, but by Biden's crooked Department of Justice and the collusive judge. And so it's replete with constitutional error. It has to be reversed. It will be reversed, but the individual appeal process is inadequate to redress the grievances of the rest of us that, again, want to hear from and have access to a presidential candidate. And that's why Missouri v. New York is is such an important case. But let's go to the four corners of the trial itself and talk about the errors here. You've got a prosecutor, Alvin Bragg, who campaigned on a promise to get President Trump. Well, then he's politically motivated and should have been disqualified from the case. That's an incurable impropriety. You've got Matthew Colangelo, a former DNC consultant, the third-ranking official at Biden's DOJ, who was deployed by Joe Biden to assist in the trial court prosecution, led the trial court prosecution in Alvin Bragg's office. You know what's ironic? Alvin Bragg's website says, Manhattan District Attorney, one standard of justice for all. How can that guy keep a straight face when he says that? Again, this is a politically motivated prosecution. Those prosecutors should have been disqualified from that case. There was never a case to begin with, and a subsequent prosecutor would have made that determination. That system in New York failed. Let's go to the due process violation in the 34-count indictment. All 34 counts refer to errant business record entries on this date, on this ledger, payments to this individual that were false in order to conceal a quote unquote other crime, another crime. And it never identifies what the other crime is. We have the requirement of due process in this country, protected by the 14th Amendment. And what it says is that we should receive notice. We have to have constitutionally sufficient notice before we're put on trial for criminal charges. And this nebulous concept of some other crime is a violation of President Trump's due process right to notice. You go to the First Amendment violation under the gag order. The gag order is supposed to protect a defendant's right to a fair trial. Well, if the defendant wants to waive that right, he should be entitled to do so. Here you've got the prosecutor asking for the gag order. It makes no sense. The trial's over. What's the justification for the gag order now? Now it's going to last until September at sentencing as we move even closer into a national election. It's absolutely ridiculous. And don't forget, the First Amendment protects not only a speaker's right to say what he or she feels, but listeners' rights to hear. That's why we're aggrieved parties as well. Finally, you go to the Sixth Amendment problem, the jury unanimity problem. Since 2020, in the case of Ramos v. Louisiana, the United States Supreme Court has held that the Sixth Amendment right to a fair trial includes the right to jury unanimity on each offense. And when the judge in New York instructed the jurors that they could agree on any old or not have to agree on any old predicate offense, that deprives President Trump of the right to jury unanimity secured by the Sixth Amendment. And it turns the jury into a roving commission free to attach criminal liability to any facts they please. That's antithetical to who we are as an American people. And again, all of that just emphasizes the illicit witch hunt nature of this prosecution.
So before I go to Mike, a couple quick questions for you, Andrew. Number one, Merchan has donated to the Biden campaign in the past. His daughter has posted all kinds of anti-Trump stuff on her social media, but she's also been paid somewhere in the area of $9 million by Democrat PACs or candidates. How does that affect this case? Like,
yeah,
that's not, I don't know.
Again, that injects an incurable impropriety on behalf of the judiciary. When I'm saying it's a collusive judiciary, that's what I mean. It's not just that the rulings are going against President Trump. It's that there's this incurable impropriety injected into the suit before the process even commenced. And that's why both the judge and the prosecutor should have been disqualified from the case. Certainly in Missouri, they would have been. But those systems in New York have failed. And not only are they failing New Yorkers and President Trump, but they're failing all Americans. Let's not forget, and certainly your viewers and listeners will agree with this proposition, that the Constitution exists to protect us from the government, and the government exists to protect our rights. And yet here the government is being weaponized to deprive an individual of his constitutional rights, but he's a stand-in for the rest of us because he's a national presidential candidate. And if they can do it to him, they can do it to all of us. We're being harmed now because our national presidential election is being upended by this lawfare that's poisonous to our democratic process. But long term, it erodes confidence in the systems that have traditionally protected the rest of us.
Yeah, I think the term I was looking for was essentially, seems like a massive conflict of interest to me.
Huge conflict of interest.
For Merchan and his daughter. And again, I'm going to go to Mike next, but I do have one more question. What does the SCOTUS decision on presidential immunity mean for this trial in particular, or this gong show?
Well, first and foremost, if you look at all of the different errors I enumerated in the previous question, those all justify dismissal of this suit and every other suit. But the immunity decision also justifies dismissal of this suit. President Trump should not be prosecuted. And the Supreme Court merely said what everyone already knew and what the founders certainly made implicit in the structure and text of the Constitution, which is that presidents have wide latitude to carry out the functions of the chief executive office and to meet exigencies, that they need legal immunity to do so. That exists elsewhere in the law. Police officers have some level of sovereign immunity. Certainly prosecutors and judges do as well. And it amazes me that Joe Biden was bemoaning the Supreme Court decision. He should have been on the White House lawn popping champagne because it means he can't be prosecuted for aiding and abetting in fentanyl distribution and human trafficking across our southern border.
Yeah, you said a mouthful there. And that's a topic we've covered extensively in Survival Dispatch News. So, Mike, if you have any questions for Andrew on that particular topic, go ahead and let's hear them. But I'd also like to hear your input on what Andrew just touched on, because again, it's a topic that we've tackled again and again and again, this facilitating cartels, human trafficking, fentanyl, and all those things.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. I'm after hearing all that, I'm definitely never getting into an argument with you. And I really hope that the Alabama AG is on board with you. And if he's not, you tell me, I'm gonna reach out. So yeah, absolutely. You know, the that's the thing that I've been screaming at the TV about all this time is, hey, you know, you've got a judge that is clearly compromised. You've got a jury that's clearly compromised. How is he going to get a fair trial there in New York City to begin with? He's one of the most highly known figures in that city. I mean, you know, they should have. I'm sorry, but you know, in my opinion, they should have had a change of venue on that whole thing. Just trying to do that in New York City, it's got to be impossible to come up with a fair trial.
Well, yeah, they cherry picked the judge too. He was supposed to be assigned randomly. They picked him. They picked the judge. They picked the jury. They cherry picked the prosecution. This thing stinks for high heavens from the get-go.
Oh, yeah.
At any moment, all electronics could cease to function. This includes your car, your home, your business, and our entire electrical infrastructure. Learn how you can protect yourself from a massive electrical disturbance today. Visit www.empro.com or call 833-EMP-PRO4 today.
I haven't seen trials like this since leaving Iraq. So, you know, there you go. Take that for what you will. But yeah, that led us to the Iraqi justice system revolving door. You remember that. So yeah, pain in the butt that whole thing was. But yeah, this whole thing has just made me absolutely insane. And yes, absolutely. I mean, we're talking about the current POTUS being able to actively facilitate terrorist groups, being able to move personnel in and out of the country, utilizing the conduit of cartels. And honestly, the cartels are essentially just a money-making terrorist organization as well. And that whole thing right there, I'm telling you, I don't know how to go around it for the presidential immunity. But boy, I'll tell you what, I don't know how that could be construed as part of his duties as the POTUS in the best interests of the nation and the people.
Well, Andrew, let's kind of stay on this topic, but let's pivot a little bit, okay? So essentially, as you already mentioned, Merchan took away Trump's First Amendment rights. And for many years, I used to go to the NRA annual meeting as a guest. The CEO of the Washington Times was a friend of mine. And I got so sick and tired of hearing Wayne Lapierre say the Second Amendment protects the First Amendment. And I come from big tech, from Sun Microsystems. And my response has been for a long time, big tech killed the First Amendment decades ago. This is not, something recent. So the reason I mention that is you've taken an interest in some big tech companies as far as suppressing the truth and spreading propaganda, for lack of a better term. Give me your thoughts on who the players are in big tech that are on your radar that you've either already served or have a inclination to serve.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me start by saying that the founders understood, and I think the First Amendment stands for a free, fair, and open marketplace of ideas where the people determine what is and isn't true based on the competition of ideas. The remedy for disfavored speech in this country has always been counter speech, not censorship. And so we've taken a lot of action here in the state of Missouri between the case Missouri v. Biden, the most important First Amendment suit in this nation's history, where we uncovered a relationship of coercion and collusion from the Biden White House across a spectrum of unelected federal bureaucratic agencies, silencing American voices on big tech in violation of the First Amendment. And guess what? Lo and behold, 100% of the voices that were silenced, that were censored at the government's demand, were conservative voices. And 100% of the speech that was censored was core political speech. And so we obtained a preliminary injunction at the district court level, defended it twice at the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, argued the case in front of the United States Supreme Court in March, and just got a ruling back in late June. Now, I'll tell you that the media got it wrong. The media says that the Supreme Court sided with Biden. That's not really what happened. What the Supreme Court said was that there was absolutely coercion from the federal government that censored American voices in violation of the First Amendment, but that censorship, the evidence that we had at the time, was limited to the years 2020 and 2021, and that we had to go back down to the trial court level and do merits discovery to determine whether or not the censorship was ongoing. I'm confident it is, because what the evidence led us to is the conclusion that the censorship demands that the government was placing on big tech grew so quickly and rapidly and were so voluminous that the government had to design a new bureaucratic apparatus to manage the censorship. And when is it that the government has ever trampled on our rights and expanded in a vacuum and then retracted on its own? That never happens. It takes a forcing function to roll it back. And so we're going to use merits discovery in this lawsuit back at the trial court level to continue to fight for the First Amendment and build a wall of separation between tech and state. The big tech marketplace behaves differently because of Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which I believe has been misinterpreted by the courts. And so you see this evolving landscape where you've got government committing censorship in violation of the First Amendment. Certainly, we're addressing that in Missouri v. Biden. We'll continue to do so. That case goes on. The fight for the First Amendment goes on. But you also see the big tech social media companies censoring on their own. And there's this kind of a moving target. And so states have taken up the mantle of responsibility and enacted statutes that require that big tech publish their censorship algorithms and that there's some level of accountability. I think that's appropriate consumer protection authority that the states have. Those cases were bundled together and called the net choice cases at the United States Supreme Court, and they've been remanded to the lower courts for further proceedings as well. So interesting to see how those legal challenges progress and how those states' laws are implemented, and can that motivate other states. And I'll tell you, as Attorney General of the state of Missouri, the fight that we are going to be engaged in, again, it's adapting to a changing and evolving battlefield. And that is, how can we use both consumer protection laws and antitrust laws to ensure that this big tech oligarchy isn't silencing programs like this? This is the last opportunity we have to save not only our culture, but our democratic republic. The left has infiltrated big tech in such a way that government censorship alone won't accomplish their objective. They actually want to not only drive any conservative thought and conversation from public discourse, but they want to fundamentally reshape our culture in ways that will make America unimaginable and unrecognizable to previous generations. And if we don't protect consumers and make consumers aware of these risks, we will lose our country. And that's why this fight's so important.
So before I go back to Jeff, two quick things. Number one, as you can tell, Mike he gets angry over this stuff like we all do. And we have a mutual connection that connected your office to mine. And that person said to me, one of the things they've discovered through polling is that angry people vote, which is kind of apropos. But the next piece I'd like you to expand on a little bit is when you are mentioning the government, this additional bureaucracy, joined at the hip with big tech and censorship. This is related to companies like Twitter, Facebook, having government portals where government employees can go in and censor comments, delete comments. Just expand on that a little bit, because it's just, that's atrocious.
Yes,
This is
it's very,
1984 stuff.
yeah, it's well, and I think that George Orwell on his most creative day could not have contrived this nadir of depravity. And it's exactly as you described. The government started out by the federal White House communications department saying, take down that post, take down that Tucker Carlson video, take down that Tommy Lahren post, de-emphasize, deplatform, shadow ban anyone who's questioning, President Biden's COVID tyranny. But it's gone worse now. It's been the vast censorship enterprise. The nerve center has been housed in this cybersecurity and infrastructure security agency within the Department of Homeland Security, CISA. Now let's think about that for a second. The Department of Homeland Security was an agency stood up in the wake of 9/11 to protect Americans from foreign attack. And now it's being weaponized to deprive us of our right to free speech and silence any voices that Joe Biden and his army of federal bureaucrats disagree with. Moreover, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, that's about computer databases and roads and bridges. And yet the director of CISA had the audacity in response to this lawsuit to say, well, there's neurological infrastructure as well. She literally thinks she has the right to control our brains. Well, how are they going to do that? By colluding with big tech to change the way Americans think, by silencing any voice in opposition. And where do you hide a dead body? On page 2 of a Google search. It's not just that they're hitting mute when we're saying things that they disagree with. It's that they're shadow banning, deplatforming, de-emphasizing. I think that's much more pernicious than anything Joseph Stalin would have done, because when Stalin shut down a printing press, everyone knew it had happened. But when your shadow ban, platform, de-emphasize, your viewers, your listeners, your audience may not know that that's happened, and you may not know that you've been censored. So again, it's this clandestine censorship enterprise that is interfering with our right to free speech and trampling on our right to free speech, in fact.
So, Jeff, I want to come back to you for the simple reason that, and Andrew
just mentioned for 26 years.
Well, kind of, sort of, but definitely.
Yeah.
So Andrew just mentioned the word clandestine, and the CIA over, decades has worked in a clandestine fashion to, say, overthrow governments, change who's in control of other countries.
Supposed to be overseas, though.
Correct. But I'd like you to expand on that, because you have firsthand experience with this stuff.
Yeah. Now, first of all, the government, when I was in the agency for 26 years, and I used to teach a course on Executive Order 12333, which defines what the intel community can do domestically and what they can't. And one of the key components of that was, okay, the CIA cannot collect data unknowingly on a U.S. citizen. Now, if this U.S. citizen volunteers to help on something, great, that's fine. But we don't go out, we don't recruit them. Even if we go out and talk to them to ask them to cooperate, we have to identify ourselves as CIA. We can't say, I'm with another group, another agency, I'm with this company. We can't do that. And the other thing we can't do, or are not supposed to do, is you cannot ask someone in the private sector to do something on your behalf that you cannot do yourself. And we are not allowed to go out and censor people. So therefore, we should not be out asking other people to censor people. And the whole CISA thing, and we disbanded that. Okay, after 26 years in the government, nothing gets disbanded. They just
renamed.
It gets renamed and maybe shoved under a different part of the stovepipe. I can guarantee you it's still there. So, Christ, we had the Rural Electrification Agency for decades after everybody was electrified, because somebody had, it was somebody's rice bowl. But yeah, they should not be doing this. That is not the function of the U.S. government. And if the CIA is involved, if the CIA is talking to Twitter or Google or Facebook, they're in violation of Executive Order 12333, and they should be fired, period. Now, it's not a law. You can't throw them in prison for it. It's an executive order. But executive orders, and if anyone, I always stress people, it's the executive order. Average citizens do not have to pay any attention to an executive order. They are not laws. If someone comes to your house and says the president has issued an executive order that says we can do this, you tell them to pound sand, because it only applies to employees of the executive branch of the federal government, nobody else. So, but those in the executive branch do have to follow those rules, and if they're not, they should be fired.
Fair enough. Andrew, I want to give you a tangible example of this stuff. Get your comments on it, and then I'll get Mike's comments after that. But there's a sheriff deputy by the name of Chris Darlington. He's also a country and Western songwriter and performer, okay? And he has a presence on social media, and his videos typically get pretty good traction, pretty good response. He recently did a video, and General Mike Flynn participated in it as well, with regards to human trafficking specific to children for sexual purposes. And his manager's a friend of mine, and when they published that video on Facebook, it's barely gotten any views or traction or anything. It is clearly being suppressed. And it begs the question, why would anybody suppress information on such a heinous topic that is trying to draw attention to this problem that exists in our society that is destroying our kids? I mean, give me your thoughts on that. I mean, that almost strikes me as downright criminal.
Yeah,
Why indeed.
I totally agree. I mean, left-wing Looney Tunes want you addicted to the government. They want you dependent on the government. They don't want anyone who is speaking out against things that the government is doing to appear heroic. And so we know, like here in the state of Missouri, there's been more than 1,100 reported incidences of human trafficking in 1 year alone because of Biden's failure to secure our national sovereignty at the southern border. And so like anyone who's speaking out against that or fighting back against that is heroic. And yet the left and certainly the oligarchs within the left-leaning big tech social media companies want to silence that and make it appear as if that's antithetical to who we are as American people, because they want to reshape our culture so that we're dependent upon the government, relying on the government for our information. COVID brought out the worst of the worst in those kind of tyrannical, despotic tendencies. And you're seeing it now, in overdrive as they erode our constitutional protections and again, feed us back into big tech, get us hooked on big tech, and then spoon feed us information and try to tell us, try to transform objective reality into something unrecognizable that they want to see created that is certainly against what we have fought so hard to protect.
Stupid question for you, Andrew. So let's just use Chris Darlington as an example. He publishes content. The content gets suppressed. Is there anything an individual can do, or it's just too bad, so sad, this is the way it is, you have to live with it?
The problem we've got, again, is Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which said that these big tech social media platforms can't be treated as publishers for the purposes of defamation suits and libel suits. And so they've insulated themselves, and they've created this oligarchic, it's not a monopoly because there's more than one of them, obviously, but it's like it has monopolistic tendencies. It's not responsive to open market impulses. And so, typically the open market would be resistant to censorship, because we could all just say, well, we're going to go use a product that has more transparency over who's being censored. And yet that's not true because of the insulation provided by Section 230 of the CDA. That also makes big tech social media marketplace more easy to be manipulated by the federal government when they're trying to coerce into committing acts of censorship in violation of the First Amendment. There's a limited target. There's a limited number of targets they have to speak to get to obtain that censorship. But the president and the White House wields enormous authority by threatening to repeal or amend Section 230 of the CDA. So they're very quick not only to get in lockstep ideologically, but behaviorally with and operationally with the left-leaning government.
Stupid question number 2. Then we'll go to Mike, because I want to pivot ever so slightly. Is Section 230 of that act, is this a law or a regulation?
It's a statute that created immunity from civil suit for these corporations. And I'm sorry, let me just real quick, if I can go back. So Section 230 is this enormous shield for these companies and creates so many. It's the legal fount for so many of the problems we're seeing on big tech now. But I'm not conceding that there aren't weapons in our arsenal to fight back. At the end of the day, I believe that we can use consumer protection law and antitrust law at the state level. And that's why having state attorneys general willing to take on these fights is so imperative. And there are some good actors. There are some platforms, Truth Social being one of them. I think that X, after Elon Musk's acquisition, is one of the last platforms dedicated to free speech. So there are some platforms that are still available that provide good consumer protections and protect the free, fair, and open marketplace of ideas. But they're very few and far between.
They are, and I would just give a shameless plug to Todd Calendar and Cloud Hub. His
Yes.
platform actually has the least amount of any censorship out there. And Jeff and Mike are familiar. Our audience has heard this before as well, but I was commenting on X on some political initiative, and my reply back to this person was, "That's moronic." And I got a pop up from X. So this is post Elon's acquisition that said I should not use the word moron because it might hurt somebody's feelings.
Politicians.
So here's I've heard Section 230 referenced multiple times over many years, and I appreciate the clarification. So here's my next question, and then I'll get Mike jump in on this as well. How does the recent SCOTUS decision on the Chevron deference doctrine being cast aside, does that play into anything with Section 230 or censorship in general? How is it a factor in any of this?
Well, it's definitely a factor when it comes to freedom and reinvigorating the separation of powers doctrine implicit in our Constitution and the plain text, history, and tradition of our founding document. Certainly the founders understood that you diffuse power over three co-equal branches of government to avoid this slouch towards despotic tyranny, and that fundamental principle present in our founding document had been eroded and erased. The Chevron doctrine allowed for the mushrooming exponential growth of the administrative state, and there's no sanction for a fourth unelected bureaucratic branch of government where rule-making, rule enforcement, and rule adjudicatory authority is consolidated in these unelected bureaucrats. And essentially what Biden's doing is bills he can't get passed through Congress because they're too progressive, too left-wing, too extreme. He just enacts through a perversion of the law, exceeding the agencies, each of those, the alphabet soup of federal bureaucratic agencies, exceeding the scope of their statutory authority and enacting administrative rules. And so that's why, again, state attorneys general are so important. We've got more than 50 lawsuits pending right now against the Biden administration's federal overreach. And certainly the overturning of the Chevron doctrine, which it was the judiciary granting deference to the rulemaking authority of these executive agencies. That no longer exists. Now the statutes mean something, and the judiciary is going to give the words of the statutes their plain and ordinary meaning. That provides a level of consistency, clarity, and predictability, which serves rule of law principles. And again, it reinvigorates the separation of powers doctrine, which emphasizes and supports and protects our freedoms.
So, Mike, you deal with the ATF on a regular basis, and of all the alphabet agencies, they seem to be one who's routinely stepped over the line as far as some of the regulations are concerned. Before you speak to that, Mike, I want to ask Andrew a question before I lose my train of thought. So, with this decision, we've returned power to the judiciary from the alphabet agencies. Okay, how do activist judges play into that, who now, instead of punting it back to the agency, take it upon themselves to rule in favor of something that is tyrannical in nature because they're an activist judge?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a problem. And it's when you've got judges who are inserting their policy preferences into their statutory interpretation. Again, it serves rule of law principles to be able to look at the plain text of the statute and give the words the meaning they had at the time they were written down. That creates predictability, consistency, and emphasizes the rule of law, supports the rule of law. When you've got a judge that says, well, I know, for instance, Title IX, it says you can't discriminate on the basis of sex. Well, Biden now says, well, sex also means gender identity. Well, what? That's certainly not what sex meant 50 years ago when those words were written down on that piece of paper. So that's just President Biden inserting his own policy preference and subverting the will of Congress and undermining Congress's authority to pass bills. The same thing happens when the judiciary puts their preferred policy positions and adds to or takes away from the plain ordinary meaning of the words in the statutes. And so that is definitely a problem, and one will have to stay on top of. That's why presidential elections are so important, so that the president can ensure that he is appointing federal judges to the judiciary, Article 3 judiciary, who will be faithful to the text and original understanding of not only our statutes, but the Constitution.
That's the best explanation I've heard on that topic. So, Mike, to you next. You deal with the ATF on a regular basis. I know that you have a good rapport with the bomb side of stuff, but you've dealt with both sides of the ATF. Speak to some of the, rules that have been passed over the years that you feel aren't really consistent with the laws as they stood at that time?
So I don't think it's just the ATF, and I work with I consult for explosive branch occasionally, and I also act as an intermediary between other companies and the explosive branch of the ATF. Where I will say the explosive branch is the smallest branch of the ATF, and it also has about 80% of the common sense in the entire ATF pretty well coalesced into one little area there. I love working with those guys. There's a lot of common sense there. They're very nice people. And you can see the absolute horror in their eyes when we talk about what the other branch or what the other major branch, the firearms branch, is doing. Okay, so for instance, I was working with one of my clients last year, and all we needed to do was essentially tweak what my client was doing with ATF to come around to more contemporary explosive rules. Fine, no problem. We worked it out. We sat down with the ATF and said, okay, industry to regulator, how do we fix this? We all sat it down. We came up with a great plan, wrote out the plan. We went ahead and wrote out all of our stuff, and we exceeded what the requirements were from the Bureau. No problem. Wonderful. Sent it in. It went through the ATF like no problem. But then it had to actually get looked at by DOJ as well. And everybody sat back and said, well, wait a minute. Why does DOJ have a dog in this hunt? This is a regulatory thing. And we had one person at DOJ saying no because I said so. And everybody sat back and said, well, hold on a second now. What is it? What role does this person at DOJ have to do with a general industry regulatory thing? And the bottom line came down to they don't. That was the point where my client and I both started picking up the phone at the behest of our folks from the ATF, who said, we're going to do it as well. And we started calling elected officials and saying, hey, this is what's going on. This does not need to happen anymore. And that's one of the things that I'm really hoping for on now that Chevron's been overturned, is we're going to be able to start removing that outside influence, unnecessary influence on industry and the like. Not just from there, but also for my industry and a lot of industries, as a matter of fact, the EPA has just been pummeling us. And I mean, my industry, the explosive industry, we get beat to death by the EPA. We really do. And I mean, I'll have like 5 different regulations from the same agency pushed down on me. Some of them are contradictory to each other, and I still wind up having to deal with this. Now, none of these are laws. These are all rulings or specifications from an agency. No lawmaker dealt with these things. No lawmaker's ever even seen these things. These are literally written by faceless bureaucrats for the sake of bureaucratization.
So, Andrew, backing up just a little bit into what Mike was describing, where the DOJ ended up getting involved in these ATF rules, regulations, whatever. Does the Chevron deference doctrine decision theoretically fix that type of problem going forward?
Well, in theory, it should help, because, again, it's putting the agencies on notice that they are constrained by the plain text of the statutes that guide their operations and authority. Now, the problem is, as you all know, and as your listeners and viewers will certainly be able to relate to, it's a zero-sum game. It's an irreducible axiomatic principle that more government equals less freedom. So as long as you have this expansive alphabet soup and these innumerable this army of faceless bureaucrats, they will take power, and the average person, the citizen, is harmed by a lack of freedom as that zero-sum game plays out, and as that vacuum is filled with the authority of government. And so it's still incumbent upon us to be able to fight back not only at the polling place, but with lawsuits against this kind of federal overreach. So theoretically, it should help. It's a great day. Let freedom ring post Chevron, but we got to remain vigilant, and we can't just assume that the federal bureaucrats are going to start doing the right thing and wake up and smell the coffee.
Yeah, this is going to be a long fight.
So that leads to my next question for Jeff and Andrew. Chevron deference was in the news a couple years ago, and the ATF was involved in that particular case. Did I or did I not read somewhere that if Congress has, I'm not sure what the right word is, but empowered an agency to make these rules, that they're free to do so? So would that not be an end run around this latest SCOTUS decision?
Well, every time they pass a law, they end up giving it to some bureaucracy in there to implement it. Congress doesn't implement squat. They pass the laws, and then it goes to the EPA or the ATF or whoever to implement it. And the problem is they're giving them this broad latitude to interpret, which isn't there. And that's kind of what the Chevron, from my reading of it, that's the shooting down the Chevron deference, is saying, no, and Congress needs to get off their backside and actually write laws that cover stuff instead of going, a one sentence thing that ends up with 66,000 pages of regulation attached to it. And that was what I saw as probably the most positive thing coming out of the Chevron case, is that it's going to make Congress do their damn job. And if they actually do their job, or are forced to do their job, maybe they won't have time to pass the Inflation Reduction Act, which doesn't reduce inflation, or do all these stupid things that they do. They'll be busy actually writing laws in detail. And if we can just get them to stop doing continuing resolutions, we might get our budget in check, because they pass those because they're too lazy to write a damn budget. So we're just going to go with last year's and keep going. But yeah, we got to force them to do their damn jobs.
So Andrew, pick up there as far as this question is concerned. Can Congress, with this decision, basically say we infer this power upon this agency, we're washing our hands, or now does that stop?
Well, it definitely limits Congress's authority and, again, constrains the agency to the plain text. I mean, I agree completely that there used to be what's called the non-delegation doctrine. And during the 1930s, that doctrine was abandoned by the Supreme Court. One wonders if we're not at the precipice of being able to reinvigorate that doctrine and essentially argue that, yeah, you're right, Congress has no authority to delegate its rule-making powers to the executive branch. Again, that serves the separation of powers. There's another doctrine that has been reinvigorated in West Virginia v. EPA, and also in the case against the first unconstitutional attempt by President Biden to cancel student loan debt, in the case that I brought at the United States Supreme Court, and that's called the Major Questions Doctrine. And so that doctrine stands for the proposition that Congress doesn't hide an elephant in a mouse hole. Essentially, if Congress intends to enact some enormous policy decisions, or in other words, like redistribute $500 billion in debt, or ban cigarettes, or do something like that, then Congress has to be explicit. And again, it's putting the onus back on Congress to speak with a more clear voice, sharpen your pencils, get back to work. And if you intend to effectuate this massive social, economic, and political change, you've got to be explicit. And at the executive branch of government, from the president on down to this alphabet soup of bureaucrats, intend to latch onto authority to effectuate these broad policy changes, then they have to show explicit textual authority from Congress in the form of a statute. They can rarely do that. So there are new founts of legal authority. There's one missing in the non-delegation doctrine, and certainly we're looking for lanes to reassert and reinvigorate that limitation on federal authority as well.
I appreciate that explanation. I want to tackle gun-related stuff and Second Amendment stuff as the last segment of our conversation, but I have a quick question before then. So when these government officials or even these big tech companies do things that are, say, in a gray zone, questionable, is there any opportunity for them to be held criminally liable, or is it strictly civil-related stuff that we could go after crooked officials / executives?
Well, that question usually is resolved with the question of what level of immunity the federal official has, and typically they have quasi sovereign immunity that is waived if they go outside the scope of their statutory authority and or violate clearly established constitutional law. And so those are difficult cases to prove, but not impossible. So there certainly can be civil liability, criminal liability for acts that are performed outside their official capacity if they're, when they're not acting under color of state law.
But not common.
Not acting under color of any law, I should say. I use state law because that's the text that appears in 42 U.S.C. 1983, but the same concept applies to the federal government.
Fair enough. I appreciate that. So let's jump to guns and the Second Amendment. You've got a really strong track record in Missouri as the Attorney General when it comes to the Second Amendment and firearms in general. Give our audience a recap of what you've accomplished in the past 18 months and what other Attorney Generals should be using as the recipe for their states.
Well, as long as I'm Attorney General, I'll promise you this: Missourians' right to keep and bear arms will be scrupulously honored. Look at Article 1, Section 23 of the Missouri Constitution. It's even a more robust protection for our right to keep and bear arms to protect our homes, our hearth, our families, and our communities. And it protects not only the firearms themselves, but ammunition and accessories as well. It says any regulation of those rights is subject to strict scrutiny, and it's the obligation, the legal, moral, ethical obligation of the state of Missouri to defend these rights. And that's an obligation that I take on as a sacred duty as Attorney General. We have fought the Department of Justice. They sued the state of Missouri because our General Assembly enacted and our governor signed the Second Amendment Preservation Act. That is a robust protection of our right to keep and bear arms. And it's also a codification of the 10th Amendment anti-commandeering doctrine. And your viewers and listeners will recall that the 10th Amendment stands for the proposition that any authority not given to the federal government or denied to the states is enjoyed by the states and the people of the states. And that the federal government is prohibited from commandeering the apparatus of state government to carry out unconstitutional objectives. That's merely what SAPA here in the state of Missouri stands for. It's a model piece of legislation, but the DOJ sued. Biden hates it because it essentially says that federal government, you can't order us to carry out your unconstitutional objectives. Well, why would he hate that? Why would he hate that? He's more concerned about what the law says than what it actually does, because it doesn't limit the federal government at all. It only limits local officials. But the Biden administration sued us. We defended the statute at the district court level and now at the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, and we'll take that one all the way to the Supreme Court if we have to. I believe in the Second and 10th Amendments. We've fought back against Biden's unlawful attempt to ban pistol braces. He has no authority to do that. Only Congress, and Congress would even be limited by the Second Amendment. And so there's no authority there to limit that right as well. The Second Amendment protects not only firearms, but the right to access ammunition and accessories. We've also fought back against his attempt to eliminate person-to-person sales at gun shows. I think about my grandfather, and, in retirement, he would travel to gun shows and he had a collection of firearms and he would meet up with his friends and buy, sell, and trade weapons. It's not a loophole if it's excluded from the law. And yet the Biden administration and the anti-gun crowd has described it as such, as if there's something wrong with it. Well, that's not empowering criminal behavior. It's only supporting what the founders would have understood to be a legitimate marketplace for person-to-person sales. And so we fought back and filed a lawsuit against the Biden administration's illegal attempt to limit that as well. And finally, we have fought back against blue states' attempts to attack the ammunition marketplace when they demanded that Lake City Ammo Plant here in the state of Missouri cease civilian ammunition production. Well, that again perverts the marketplace and it manipulates the marketplace in an attempt to drive up the price of ammunition to make it where you and I can't afford it. They know they can't take away our individual right to keep and bear arms, so they're just going to manipulate the marketplace to drive legitimate participants out of the marketplace. That's not going to happen on my watch. We fought back and put a stop to it. I will always fight for and protect our right to keep and bear arms here in the state of Missouri.
That's awesome, Andrew. So I'm going to get Jeff and Mike to weigh in on this because it's a big topic, but I have two really quick questions for you. You can answer them in whatever order you want to. As the Attorney General of the state of Missouri, what happens if George Soros sponsors a surrogate who becomes a DA, say in St. Louis, and that particular individual runs counter to what your policies are, your procedures as the AG, And then I have one more question, but I'll let you tackle that one first.
Well, true story. That happened. George Soros bought and paid for a political office for Kim Gardner, the former circuit attorney of the city of St. Louis, a Soros-backed prosecutor who had a 96% non-prosecution rate, 96% of crimes committed she wouldn't do anything about, and victims were suffering. It drove more than 500 businesses out of St. Louis. I filed the lawsuit that removed her from office. That's how we deal with that problem.
McCloskey's, right?
Friends of mine.
Yeah, but for our audience who don't recognize that name, explain who the McCloskeys are and how she played a role in their prosecution.
So the McCloskeys were legitimate gun owners who defended their property against a Black Lives Matter mob who was destroying private property and trying to trespass and had threatened them. And all that the McCloskeys did was stand on their property, holding their farms, saying no further. And yet the Soros-backed prosecutor, instead of prosecuting the criminals who had trespassed and destroyed private property and threatened the McCloskeys, prosecuted the McCloskeys. Now, she was disqualified from that case because of the improper acts that she committed by campaigning on a promise to go after them. That was a politically motivated prosecution. So again, that is an incurable impropriety, similar to Alvin Bragg's incurable impropriety in his prosecution of President Trump. It's a conflict of interest, to put it more plainly. Kim Gardner was disqualified from that case as she should have been, but ultimately I removed her from office with a lawsuit given to me under the authority of the laws of the state of Missouri.
That's awesome. I did not know that you did that. Well done. Last question, then Jeff and Mike. So Texas passed a law, maybe it's a regulation, I think it's a law, that basically said if you live in the state of Texas and a suppressor is manufactured in Texas, that a tax stamp is not necessary per the NFA. And then Tennessee did a copy and paste and did it as well. What are your thoughts on that? Their argument, if as I understand it correctly, is that a federal agency can only get involved in stuff that involves interstate commerce. And because this would stay in the state of Texas, therefore the ATF can't require you to buy a tax stamp through the NFA.
Yep, that's right. Congress's authority is limited to its enumerated powers in the Constitution. One of those powers is to regulate interstate commerce, not intrastate commerce. That is a valid exercise of the state's sovereign authority. We still live in a democratic republic with a system of federalism and a federal government of limited authority. That is an important piece of legislation, and I'm proud to see that both Texas and Tennessee have done that.
That's awesome. All right, Jeff, I'll let you jump in now.
First, I want to correct something he said in his introduction. He said he did 2 combat tours. If he was a security guard in St. Louis, he did 3 combat tours. Okay, that's 3.
Thanks for yanking the rug out from under me, Jeff. Appreciate it.
Oh, were you going to say that?
Yeah, I was thinking we're 2
tours,
not
buddy. No, I think the most abused part of the Constitution is the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment, clearly states those powers not given to the federal government belong to the states. It's more complicated than that, but that's basically it. If the federal government, if the Constitution doesn't tell the federal government you can do it, then they can't, but it goes to the states. And if you look at the Dobbs decision on abortion, there is absolutely nothing in the U.S. Constitution about abortion. They made up some, this mythical right to privacy thing and kind of tried to lay it over. But they were absolutely right in saying this is not a federal issue. It should be a state issue. And let the states do what the states do, and it's great little laboratories to see what works and what doesn't. And the same thing can be done for most of the gun laws. I mean, if California wants to tax ammunition, fine, but it shouldn't apply to Texas. And Texas can say, okay, we produce ammunition here in Texas. We have a factory in wherever, in San Angelo, and the federal government has no authority to regulate that at all, as long as we only sell to inside the state of Texas. And you can do the same thing, anything with alcohol, with tobacco. If a state wants to say no more excise tax on tobacco that is grown here, consumed here, the federal government should not be able to come in and tell them to do anything about it, because it's like, exceeds your authority. You have no authority on this.
Andrew, you got something to say? Go ahead.
Man, I'm digging deep into my interstate commerce decisions. Thinking back to the 1930s, where the the federal agents had burned the hay or the wheat, the agricultural crop, and said, well, this implicates interstate commerce. And the court was like, yeah, is it Wickard v. Filburn? And then in the 1990s, Gonzalez v. Raich, I think, was the decision. And it actually dealt with marijuana. And my sense of that one was that Justice Scalia just did not like controlled substances. But yeah, there's been some really wild decisions. And I'm just, you triggered my memory, and I'm digging deep there back to con law class on these interstate commerce.
They would say things like, well, you once traveled out of state, therefore, it has nothing to do with the product.
Yeah.
But you once went to a wedding in Arkansas, so you have left the state. Therefore, if you have money in your pocket from selling, rifle ammunition in Texas, you're affecting interstate commerce. And that is the most, excuse my French, bullshit interpretation of the law as it's even possible.
I concur. Let's get this guy on the federal bench.
Hey, I'd do it in a heartbeat. No one would like my decisions, though. I'd probably be the first one to be impeached in a while, because I don't care what other people think. I really don't.
That's too funny.
And if I was president, any bill that came before me, I would say, okay, before I even look at this, show me where in the Constitution you have the authority to do what you're proposing to do.
Yeah. Well,
and if it's not there, I'm vetoing it immediately.
The presidents used to do that. I mean, that's not. Yeah, I mean that was how it was intended to be. Certainly, George Washington set that precedent. Other presidents followed that precedent, and it's been abandoned. I think that you're absolutely right. Both Congress, the president, and the judiciary each take an oath to be faithful to the United States Constitution, and they're co-equal branches of government.
Yep.
Well said,
And
Andy.
if you got rid of a lot of the regulatory authority of the federal government by actually enforcing the 10th Amendment, what that would do, it would push the power to the states, and we wouldn't have California making rules that impact Louisiana. Let Louisiana make its own rules. And that's what we need. We are the United States of America. We are not the United Government of America.
Well said, Jeff. So, Mike, you're fairly active with politics in your area and in Alabama. I want to share a conversation I had with Todd Callender before you came on, when Andrew and I and Jeff were talking. Todd Callender said that he feels like Andrew is the tip of the spear and is leading by examples for other attorney generals and what should be done in other states to exercise their rights. So my question to you, Mike, is that Alabama pretty strong on Second Amendment stuff, but of all the stuff that we've discussed with Andrew so far, is there anything that you want to bring up to the officials that you work with and that you talk to on a regular basis that Andrew is spearheading?
I'll tell you what, just about everything that he's spearheading. Yeah, I'm gonna talk to folks about. Yeah, because I'm liking what you're selling here, man. But the biggest thing, the absolute biggest thing that I think would benefit everyone is a return to these United States and a great strengthening of the 10th Amendment. Strengthen the states, reduce the power of the federal government dramatically. And I think we would all do much better for that.
Go back to the United States are instead of the United States
is. Exactly. These United States as opposed to the United States. Yeah, and 100%. I mean, and yeah, let's face it, Kay Ivey, we call her Mima Ivey down there in Montgomery. She's pretty strong about telling the federal government to go pound sand on a fairly regular basis, and I love her for that. She's got several other things that she really likes to get a little strong on, and occasionally Mima will break out the wooden spoon, and that's a whole lot of fun to watch. So, yeah. Well, if you've never seen a state level wooden spoon, that's some fun stuff right there. Let me tell you.
You reminded me of something, and I worked in FBI spaces. I worked with the FBI regularly for 26 years, and there's one thing I've noticed about it. Every FBI field office, they don't have a jail.
Nope.
They depend on local jails to lock people up. So if the FBI starts going around like that poor doctor in Austin who, basically dropped the bomb that they were still doing sex change operations on little kids when they were supposed to, and they arrested him, for, violating HIPAA or some nonsense, which he didn't. They can't store him. They have to put him in a county jail. And if the counties go, yeah, we're not taking him. Or if you do, we're just going to turn him loose. That would really put a hitch in their get along because they don't have their own jails. They are dependent on state and local jails. So you can hold that over their head and say, no, we're not doing that.
Well, and you're starting to see
arrest the FBI agents for violating whistleblower laws.
Right. Well, you're starting to see more and more and more chiefs and sheriffs not working with their federal counterparts, and essentially telling them, no, we're not going to do this, and you're not going to do this in my county. As a matter of fact, you need to go on ahead and fold up your tents and go on home, because we're not going to be working with you here in our county, and until you come in here with a federal writ that holds us to this, you can go on away.
Sheriff Grady Judd is
writ would compel them to necessarily work with the FBI, for example. If
Right.
the FBI's, I want to arrest half your neighbors because we think they're, because they voted Republican. The county can go, we're not doing that. We have a writ. Well, shove that writ.
Yep.
Sheriff Grady Judd, Polk County, Florida is a shining example of that.
Yeah.
So, Andrew, you have a primary coming up on August the 6th. Give us your 60-second pitch on getting people to reelect you. Go.
Yeah, look, guys, I'm a veteran, I'm a father, and I'm a proven conservative warrior who's been fighting and winning for Missourians. Now, listen, when you institute transformative conservative change and you disrupt the status quo, you upset the status quo, and the establishment lashes back. That's what's happening to me. The establishment, in the form of a DC dark money group, is pumping millions of dollars into removing me from office. Why? Because they don't like my blue collar upbringing. They don't like the fact that I'm a veteran who brings a warrior ethos to this job and that I've been fighting and winning. I need everybody who can, that's out there, who's listening, to support me. Go to baileymo.com. That's baileymo.com. Lend me your support. This is a call to action. I want you to also, if you live in the state of Missouri, make sure on August 6th, you go vote for Bailey on August 6th and send a message to the DC special interest that Missouri's not for sale. But I want you to go further than that. I want everybody to check out Vote for America, register to vote. There are innumerable gun owners in this country who aren't registered to vote and don't participate in the electoral process. You've got to do that if we're going to reclaim our country and secure our freedoms. It is an irreducible axiomatic principle that with rights come responsibilities. You have the right to vote. You have a responsibility to take yourself to the polling place. Register at Vote for America. Find a friend, somebody you go to the shooting range with. Get them registered, but go further than that. Take them to the polling place on Election Day. We just need you to show up and fight for one day, and we can win this thing and save our country. It starts here in Missouri. Vote Bailey on August 6th. Help us out at baileymo.com. Register your friends to vote at Vote for America, and then take them with you to the polling place, and we will defend this country and reclaim our national heritage.
That's awesome, Andrew, and I really appreciate everything that you're doing. Survival Dispatch, when we became aware of your primary coming up, we went and made a small donation on baileymo.com. And I'm in Florida, but the fact of the matter is I agree with Todd. You're a lightning rod for this stuff, and you're setting a great example for other states. And so I would encourage our audience, who we always give actionable steps to them. What can you do to get in this fight? You can send some money towards Andrew's campaign. As he mentioned, you can go to vote4america.org and get registered. When you go to vote, take somebody with you who doesn't normally vote. Here's an interesting statistics for the guys for Vote for America. If 1.5% of the people who vote on a regular basis take one person with them who doesn't normally vote, the 2024 election becomes too big to rig, too big to steal. So we're asking all of our followers, please take somebody with you to the polls on November the 5th. If you're in Missouri, take somebody with you on August the 6th for Andrew's primary. You can find Andrew has a very active account on X at AG Andrew Bailey. And I will be putting links to all this stuff below, including this thread on X, which is it's a fascinating read on the work that Andrew is doing. Other stuff that we've shared with you before, go to truethevote.org. There's over 100,000 people already volunteered to be poll watchers. You can reach out to over 500 attorneys who will be on standby the night of the election. If you see something funky going on, you can call them, and hopefully they can get an emergency injunction to stop people from putting, a cardboard over windows so that you can't see stuff being counted. And I would also give a shout out to our friends at americaproject.com. They're deep in this fight as well, as far as election integrity is concerned, amongst the border and other issues. All of these groups could greatly benefit from you dedicating time as a volunteer, money to support their causes, get the word out, share stuff on your social media. And you know what? Like Mike is always talking to his elected officials, especially locally. Talk to your local elected officials and say, you need to have a look at Andrew Bailey in Missouri. This guy's blazing a trail. Andrew, final comment?
Hey, God bless you guys. God bless your audience. If patriots unite and we band together and we vote together and we register each other and drive each other to the polling place, we can fight and we can win. Thank you for the work that you guys do. Thank you for your dedication to this country and carrying on that service in the form of this broadcast. And I'm grateful.
Amen to all of that, Andrew. And everybody out there, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. And be safe.
Nope. We gotta do the conflicted card.
Oh, golly. I see Andrew gave such a great answer at the beginning.
I cut in line. I'm sorry, guys.
Okay, here we go. My apologies. See, this is what happens when you put me in charge of the conflict question, Mike. I mean,
right? Usually it's me, but I'm driving.
Fair enough. The government collapsed and everyone has been on their own for months. Out of nowhere, 6 men wearing UN uniforms appear at your door saying that they are with the government and that they need your ammo and supplies along with everyone else's in order to help reestablish order. You and your family must comply or be counted as anti-government radicals. Would you enlist and donate all you have to the new government and be counted as a patriot? Or would you be labeled as a terrorist and fight them off if you could? Andrew's decision, he already gave it at the beginning. He's going to give them all the lead that they can handle. Jeff?
I'm with Andrew on this one. If they're UN, they're not government. UN is not a government, and it never has been. I hope to God it never will be. We should be out of that idiot place. No, and if they're UN, that tells me they're not even American. So whose government are they wanting me to join? I'll keep my own, and like I say, I'll give them my ammunition one round at a time.
There's probably a whole series of Survival Dispatch episodes that could be done on what Americans would do if blue helmeted UN soldiers showed up here. And does that include some of the illegals, these invaders who've been brought across the border? Jeff, you got one more thing?
Yeah, one more quick question on that is I will be a terrorist, just like the guys at the Boston Tea Party were terrorists.
Fair enough. Mike?
Well, it's real simple. I'm hopping in the back of my Hilux that was illegal before this whole thing came down. I'm going to hit the tape player and start playing Welcome to the Jungle, baby. And then I'm going to look at them and say, welcome to the Panjshir Valley.
A little appetite for destruction. I love it.
There's not a lot I can add to this other than I'm going to hop in the truck and head for Missouri because I know Andrew is going to protect all of our interests there. All right, second time's the charm. Thank you for following Survival Dispatch. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe, and be safe.
Remote meetings have quite a few benefits. Data security isn't one of them. Until now. Presenting CloutHub Meets, a safe, simple, and secure meeting platform that puts you in complete control of your data. With HIPAA-compliant paid and free plans cheaper than Zoom, there are no apps to install, no saved data, and no big brother tracking your every move. Stop worrying if the services you use are using you and sign up for CloutHub Meets today at clouthubmeets.com.